All right, deep divers. You guys wanted it, so here it is. Sex worship in primitive cultures. We're going deep on this one. Exploring how ancient societies viewed and ritualized procreation.
Hmm. Fascinating stuff.
Yeah, and maybe a little surprising to some. We'll be drawing insights from some really interesting sources, like the sex worship and symbolism of primitive races.
You know, it's interesting because these practices, while they might seem shocking to us now, actually served really vital purposes for these societies.
Yeah.
They reflect their core values about life and death and the continuation of the human race. I mean, that's some pretty heady stuff.
I mean, think about it. Most of us today wouldn't exactly call ourselves sex worshipers.
Yeah.
But for these ancient cultures, it was like a totally different story.
Yeah. I mean, they practiced it openly as a solemn religious rite.
A religious rite.
Yeah.
I mean,
Can you imagine that?
it's wild. We actually have accounts from explorers like Captain Cook,
Oh, yeah.
who witnessed, natives in the Southern Pacific performing the sex act as like literally a part of a religious ceremony.
Yeah, and it wasn't just on some, remote island.
Right.
Historical sources tell us that in India, there were temples where designated women performed sex acts as a form of sacrifice.
Wow. Okay, so that's definitely a different perspective.
Mhm.
But I'm curious, if they were so open about it, why the shift to using symbols? What happened there?
Well, it's more complex than just saying, societies became more prudish. As they evolved, their beliefs, their practices, everything just became more nuanced, more layered with meaning. They developed like these sophisticated symbolic languages to express those beliefs.
Okay.
And those symbols often carried multiple layers of interpretation, right? Like, take, for example, what we call phallic symbols.
Phallic symbols. So we're talking about objects that resemble,
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. And these symbols were everywhere. I mean, from obelisks to church spires.
spires. I mean,
Think about it. Why were those particular shapes chosen? What did those societies associate with that kind of verticality? Why did it represent, male potency?
it's true. I never even thought about it that way.
Yeah.
They were encoding their beliefs into the very shapes of their world.
Exactly.
That's amazing.
And it wasn't just male symbols, female representations were equally important,
Right.
though often more subtle. The lotus flower, for instance, it's everywhere in Eastern art and architecture.
Yeah, it is a beautiful flower,
Yeah.
but I'm sensing there's more to it than just that.
Right.
What's the deeper meaning there?
Well, according to a lot of sources, it's a symbol of female reproductive power, what's called the yoni.
Yeah.
It's emergence from, muddy water to blossom into something so pure and beautiful. It becomes a very powerful metaphor for, life emerging from seemingly unpromising circumstances.
So it's not just the flower itself. It's about its journey. It's about this transformation.
Yeah.
It really makes you think how many other seemingly innocent objects around us hold these, hidden meanings.
Yeah, you start to see the world a bit differently once you understand this kind of symbolic language. And it wasn't just objects either. I mean, entire pantheons of gods were connected to procreation.
Like the Greek god Pan
Right.
or the Roman Priapus. I mean, those statues are pretty hard to miss once you know what they represent.
Exactly. And their stories, their attributes, they reveal even more about how these societies viewed male sexuality, its power, its potential dangers, even a god like Bacchus.
Bacchus, I thought he was all about the wine.
He is, but his festivals, get this, they involve large phallic symbols being paraded through the streets.
Okay, that is definitely not your average, wine tasting.
Yeah.
It sounds like these symbols and rituals were just, really deeply embedded in their everyday lives.
Oh, absolutely. And let's not forget the animal kingdom. Animals weren't just companions or sources of food. They were imbued with symbolic meaning, too. Take the bull with its strength and virility. That was kind of an obvious choice to represent male potency. Or the snake, because of its shape, maybe, or its ability to shed its skin, be reborn, That represented fertility.
The life force. Yeah.
Exactly. Even creatures like the fish, associated with water and the feminine principle, they all played a role in this symbolic language.
So they were drawing inspiration from the natural world all around them.
Oh, totally.
But how did they combine these different symbols? Did it ever get confusing?
Well, they could combine them in some really creative, sometimes surprising ways. For example, imagine a bull standing on top of a dolphin.
A bull on a dolphin?
Yeah.
That's a strange combination.
It is, but it makes perfect sense in their symbolic language. The bull representing the masculine, and the dolphin, often associated with water, the feminine. Together, they represented this union of male and female energies, which was like essential for creation. It seems simple, but it really speaks to a mindset where abstract ideas were made tangible through this readily available imagery.
It's like a visual puzzle
Yeah.
where, like, each piece holds a deeper meaning. But I'm curious about something. We've talked about sex worship and all these symbols, but what about sun worship? I mean, it seems like a totally different thing, but I have a feeling they're connected somehow.
You're right to sense a connection. Sun worship, while seemingly separate, was actually deeply intertwined with sex worship. You see, the sun, with its life-giving energy, was seen as the ultimate male symbol. Its power paralleled the act of procreation.
So the sun's rays reaching down to Earth,
Were seen as a kind of cosmic fertilization.
bringing life and warmth to the world.
Exactly. And just as the sun was associated with, the masculine, the moon, with its cycles, its connection to water,
Right.
that was associated with the feminine. Even modern symbols like the star and crescent have, ancient roots in this duality.
So when we see those symbols today, we're actually looking at like an echo of these ancient beliefs about the balance of male and female energies. That's pretty mind-blowing. But I'm also curious about something else. We've talked about these open rituals and then this shift to symbolism. But wasn't there something in between, something more hidden?
We were talking about the mysteries, these secret rituals central to a lot of ancient religions, while the exact details are, well, shrouded in secrecy.
Right, of course.
We know that they often revolved around themes of death and rebirth, particularly of a sun god.
So it wasn't just about celebrating life. It was also about confronting death.
Exactly. And the death and rebirth of the god wasn't just, a metaphor for the cycle of the seasons. It was also a very powerful symbol of regeneration, of, the cyclical nature of life itself, and how it's inextricably linked to procreation.
So these mysteries, those secret rituals, were a way of exploring the deepest mysteries of life and death and how they're connected to this, this primal urge to create new life. Makes you wonder, like, what anxieties they were trying to address, what psychological functions those rituals served.
But that's probably a topic for another deep dive.
Probably.
For now, I think we've covered a lot of ground. We've seen how these ancient societies went from open worship to a more complex system of symbols and even delved into those secretive, mysteries.
Yeah.
But I have a feeling this is just the tip of the iceberg.
Oh, you're right. We've only just begun to scratch the surface of this fascinating subject. And what's even more intriguing is how those symbols evolved, how their meanings kind of shifted and layered over time.
So it wasn't just a straightforward progression from open worship to symbolism. There's more to the story.
Much more. And that's what we'll be exploring in the next part of our deep dive.
Get ready to uncover even more hidden meanings.
And surprising connections. Okay, so we've established that ancient cultures, they weren't exactly shy about sex worship. They had those open rituals, all those intricate symbols, and even those super secretive mysteries. But what I'm really fascinated by is how those symbols, how they evolved over time. It's like they started with the literal and then things got way more abstract, more layered with meaning. I don't know, how did that happen?
It's pretty incredible, huh? A real testament to the ingenuity and adaptability of the human mind. Remember, these early societies, they didn't have the same tools that we have today for recording and transmitting knowledge.
Right.
They relied on oral traditions, on visual representations, those rituals passed down through generations.
Makes sense.
So those symbols, they weren't just decorations. They were like a language of beliefs and values.
Oh.
And just like any language, it evolved.
Yeah.
Became more complex, more nuanced, capable of expressing increasingly sophisticated ideas.
So it wasn't just a matter of becoming more prudish like we were talking about before. It was about developing a richer, more symbolic way of expressing these beliefs.
Yeah, exactly.
I can see how that makes sense. But can you give us a specific example of how this evolution played out?
Sure. Take the obelisk, for instance. Initially, it might have been a very straightforward phallic symbol, just representing male potency in a very direct way.
Right.
But over time, it kind of became associated with the sun's rays, reaching down to Earth.
Oh, interesting.
And the sun, as we discussed, was seen as the ultimate life-giving force. And its energy paralleled the act of procreation. So the obelisk, while still retaining its original symbolic connection to male potency, could also then become a representation of the sun god's power, his ability to bring life and warmth to the world.
So it's like the symbol took on this added layer of meaning, this connection to the sun's life-giving energy. It makes me wonder if that's how they started to move away from those more literal representations of sex. Because let's be honest, some of those early symbols were pretty blatant.
Well, it's true. As societies developed these more complex religious beliefs, those early symbols might have seemed a bit too simplistic, too crude even.
Yeah.
They needed a language that could express, more nuanced ideas about the interconnectedness of life and death and regeneration.
Right.
And that's where the symbolism, it really started to flourish.
Okay, so the obelisk went from being a straightforward phallic symbol to representing the sun god's power.
Yeah.
What about other symbols? Did they go through similar, transformations?
Absolutely. Think about the lotus flower. We talked about its connection to female reproductive power, but its symbolic meaning, it goes even deeper than that. The lotus, it emerges from muddy water to blossom into something beautiful and pure. So it's a really powerful metaphor for, the potential for life to emerge from seemingly unpromising circumstances, for purity and beauty to arise from the mundane.
Yeah, it's not just about the flower itself. It's about that process of transformation,
Yeah,
about the resilience of life. I
exactly.
can see how that would resonate with people.
And that metaphor could be applied to both, the natural world and to human procreation. The lotus could represent the blossoming of a young woman into adulthood or the emergence of new life from the womb.
Right.
It's a symbol that speaks to the cyclical nature of life, death, and rebirth, which was a theme that was central to so many ancient religions.
So it's like these symbols were like multi-purpose tools,
Mm.
capable of expressing these really complex ideas about life and death and regeneration. But what about those animal symbols? Did they go through similar evolutions?
Certainly. The serpent, for example. It wasn't just a phallic symbol. It was also associated with healing, with wisdom, with the cyclical nature of life and death because of its ability to shed its skin, to, seemingly be reborn. Those different meanings, they could coexist, depending on the context, on the specific ritual or myth.
I'm starting to see how flexible this symbolic language was. It allowed them to express such a wide range of ideas using a relatively small set of symbols.
Exactly. And those symbols could be combined and recombined in endless variations, creating this rich tapestry of meaning.
Wow.
It's like a visual language that speaks directly to our subconscious, bypassing, our rational minds and tapping into something deeper, more primal.
It makes you wonder how much of our own symbolism, even today, is rooted in these, ancient beliefs. But didn't this complexity, this layering of meaning, didn't it eventually lead to misunderstandings? How did something so sophisticated end up as just crude superstition?
Well, that's a great question. Part of it has to do with, how knowledge and power were structured in these societies. Remember those mysteries we mentioned earlier?
Yeah.
Those secret rituals? They were often controlled by, a priestly class
Right.
who held the keys to understanding the deeper meanings behind the symbols and the myths.
So as those societies changed, as those priestly classes lost power, that knowledge was lost too.
In many cases, yes.
Right.
And without that deeper understanding, those symbols could easily be misinterpreted, stripped of their original context, and reduced to their most basic, often crudest interpretations. The phallus, once a symbol of, the life-giving power of the sun god, it could just be like a simple good luck charm.
Wow.
The serpent, once a symbol of healing and rebirth, could become an object of, fear and superstition.
It's a shame, really. It's like a beautiful language that's been forgotten. It's poetry lost in translation.
Mm.
But even though those original meanings, might have been lost, it's clear that these symbols and rituals, they left a lasting impact on later cultures. We can still see echoes of them in art, in literature, even some of our modern day customs.
Oh, you're absolutely right. Take those maypole celebrations, for instance. They
Yeah.
might not have the same, overt sexual connotations that they once did, but they still represent a celebration of spring, of fertility, of the renewal of life. Those ancient impulses, those primal urges, they're still there, just expressed in different ways.
Like those ancient ways of understanding and ritualizing procreation, they've left their mark on us, even if we, express those impulses in different ways today. I'm starting to see those echoes everywhere. It's like a secret code that's been hidden in plain sight all along.
And that's part of what makes this whole deep dive so fascinating. It gives you a new lens through which to view the world around you, to see the echoes of those ancient beliefs in the most unexpected places.
Yeah.
But our exploration isn't over yet. We've talked about the symbols and rituals, but what about the psychology behind them? What can these ancient practices teach us about, the human mind,
Mm.
about how we process these, fundamental drives and impulses? That's what we'll be exploring in the final part of our deep dive.
Okay, so we've gone pretty deep on sex worship in ancient cultures. I mean, we've uncovered those open rituals, that whole evolution of symbols, even those mysteries we talked about.
Yeah, it's been a wild ride.
It really has. But now I'm kind of curious about the psychology behind it all. What can these ancient practices tell us about like the human mind, about how we like grapple with these powerful primal urges?
You know, it's fascinating to think about, isn't it? Because studying this stuff isn't just about ancient history. It's like a window into like the very foundation of human behavior.
Okay, so we're not just talking about like dusty old rituals here. We're talking about like fundamental human drives, the things that make us tick.
Right.
But how do we connect those dots? Like, how does something like a fertility ritual from like thousands of years ago relate to us today?
Well, think about it like this. Think back to those nature worship rituals we discussed. The rain dances, the ceremonies aimed at ensuring a bountiful harvest.
Right, the ones focused on like securing those basic necessities for survival.
Exactly. Those rituals, they were like a direct response to a very real, very urgent human need, the need to survive. And just as those early societies ritualized their need for food, they also ritualized their need to procreate.
It's like the most fundamental drive,
Yeah.
essential for, continuing the species.
Exactly. So are you saying that sex worship is like the psychological equivalent of those nature rituals?
Kind of.
Yeah.
They're both ways of dealing with these primal urges, these essential needs.
That's a great way to put it. These rituals, these symbols, they provided a framework for, understanding these powerful forces,
Mm.
for integrating them into their worldview, and for, ensuring, at least in their minds, that those needs would be met.
I see your point. That makes total sense for ancient cultures. But how does it apply to us today? I mean, we don't exactly have temples dedicated to procreation.
No, we don't. True. But the underlying psychological principles, they're still relevant. Think about how we as individuals develop from childhood to adulthood.
You mean like how we learn to understand and manage our emotions, our desires?
Exactly. We go through stages just as those societies did. As children, we might not fully grasp the complexities of sex and procreation, but we still have those basic drives, those impulses, to connect, to form bonds.
So could you say that our childhood games, our fantasies, are those our own kind of personal rituals?
In a way, yeah. It's how we explore those drives in a safe, symbolic way long before we really understand them.
Right.
And as we mature, those expressions, they become, more sophisticated,
Mm-hmm.
more nuanced, just as those ancient symbols
It's
evolved.
like we're all going through our own like mini evolution
Yeah.
of understanding and expressing these
Yeah.
these fundamental human drives. That's pretty amazing. But what happens when things go wrong? What about when people, get stuck in those earlier stages,
Yeah.
or those drives become like distorted?
Well, that's where things get really interesting from, a psychological perspective.
Mhm.
And it's where the study of this ancient sex worship can actually provide some really valuable insights.
So I've talked about those unhealthy expressions, right? Like those secret societies, the ones that kind of twisted those ancient rituals for their own purposes.
Yeah.
Are you saying there's a broader connection there?
Absolutely. By understanding like the historical and the psychological context of sex worship, we can actually gain a much deeper understanding of how those same drives, when they're misdirected or distorted, can manifest in unhealthy ways in individuals. It's not about drawing like direct lines between those ancient rituals and modern day problems, but it's about recognizing the patterns, understanding those underlying dynamics.
So it's less about saying, this ancient ritual directly caused this modern problem, and more about understanding like the deeper psychological forces that are at play.
Exactly. Think about those myths where the god is like lost and then found, the death and rebirth symbolism that we talked about. Those myths, they could be seen as a way of processing anxieties about loss, about the cyclical nature of life and death. And those same anxieties, when they're fixated on sex or procreation, they can manifest in really unhealthy ways in individuals.
It's like those myths and symbols were like a way of working through these universal human anxieties that we still grapple with today. It's a good reminder that even though those ancient cultures, they might seem, very different from us. We share these fundamental human experiences, these drives, these fears.
And by understanding those shared experiences, by tracing the evolution of how humans have, dealt with those drives and those fears, we can gain a deeper understanding of ourselves, of the complexities and the contradictions of human nature.
Wow, that's incredibly insightful. So we've gone from like ancient rituals to modern psychology, uncovering hidden symbols and exploring the deepest corners of human desire. It's really incredible how much we can learn from these ancient practices.
It really is. It's a reminder that we're all part of a continuum, a story that stretches back to those earliest expressions of, human longing and desire. And by understanding, where we came from, we can better navigate the complexities of who we are today.
Well, deep divers, we've reached the end of our journey into the fascinating world of sex worship and symbolism in primitive cultures. We've delved into history, we've explored symbolism, we even ventured into the realm of psychology. What started as a look at ancient rituals has become a journey of self-discovery. It's a reminder that those echoes of those ancient beliefs and practices, they're still with us today, shaping our thoughts, our desires, and our understanding of the world. Keep those brains buzzing. And until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep discovering those hidden connections that make us human.